Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the WILDMAN Revolution podcast. And holy shit, finally, I've been able to get this man back on a podcast. Both of our schedules, and he is someone who is traveling the world. Pretty sure he's in El Salvador right now. But Lukey Mikic, it's great to have you back, mate. After them few cracking episodes we recorded early on. A little bit on Luke. Luke is my mark. What is it? My markets expert. That's what I'm claiming now. He's my go-to. All
I'll put
things
that on a
markets.
resume.
All things markets. All things Klaus Schwab. I think he's his love child. No sarcasm there. But I know today we've got some really powerful stuff to drop into, man. And it's so good to have you back on. How you been?
It's good to be here, mate. Thanks again for having me. I always love coming on the podcast. I've been great. How are you?
Yeah, I'm epic, man. I'm epic. It's been busy. All the things
Mm.
happening. Lots of weather stuff happening here in Australia again now. So that always takes my attention for a little bit.
Oh
Um,
yeah,
who knows what they're spraying in the sky? But no, life's really good, man. Life's really good.
that's good. That's good. I do miss Australia. Hold down the fort for me. I'll be
Uh,
back one day.
yeah, wait till we clear out all the rubbish that's over here. Then these nefarious organizations parading as politicians and legitimate companies that aren't even companies here. Again, I don't want to go on that tangent. That gets me fired up. To be honest, man, I've really switched off from a lot of the politics and things like that, and just been living my best life. And it's helped me so much. And for all the listeners out there, I know a lot of you are caught up still in the world stuff. We're going to touch on some world stuff today, but what grounds it in the conversations I definitely have with someone like Luke is um, he grounds into like facts and figures. He grounds into cycles and what's playing out, and has a really solid focus on what is playing out from history. History never repeats, but I like history always rhymes. He is an expert on the cycles. Again, go back to the earlier podcast. I think we did a 3 hour one where we had to cut it out at the start. That was gold. But you ground into I love grounding into numbers. I like in crypto, I love grounding into charts. It takes the emotion out of things. And when we're talking about world stuff, people can easily get emotional and be caught in fear and like, holy shit, the world's going to end. And one of the things that come with that, talking of markets, is solutions that come with this as well. Bitcoin, you're would what be perceived as a Bitcoin maxi. I see the newspaper in the background there. You're in El Salvador. Tell us a little bit about being in El Salvador and the impact what they're doing as a government, you could say, um, when it comes to the world of Bitcoin and more.
Yeah, so El Salvador, obviously, for anyone who doesn't know, they're the first country to actually make Bitcoin legal tender. So they did that in 2021. It's been about a year now since El Salvador has been using Bitcoin as legal tender, and their economy is thriving. I think GDP is up something like a 10 or 11% in a year for El Salvador, and that's massive. And for most people would probably not know, but El Salvador is a very poor country. So I think the average wage is something like 300 US dollars a month. So these people are really poor. 70% of the people here in El Salvador don't have bank accounts. And now, since Nayib Bukele, the president of El Salvador, made Bitcoin legal tender, now instantly everyone in the country who has access to a smartphone now essentially has a bank account. They have a Bitcoin bank account. So I think remittances is something that's very big in El Salvador. So I think it makes up something like 20 or 30% of the country's GDP. So for anyone who doesn't know, there's actually more El Salvadorians living outside El Salvador than there is living inside El Salvador. So it's a very poor country. People want to get out. They go and make money in the United States and they send money back home. And that's obviously called remittances. The issue with El Salvador is their country is pretty much ran and taken over by these predatory banks like Western Union. So if you try to send $100 from the US to El Salvador, essentially the banks take like a 30% cut out of that $100.
Wow.
So for somebody who's only earning $300 a month and you're getting slapped a $30 charge or a $30 fee on every $100 transaction, it's taking a big bite out of the available money you've got. So Bitcoin instantly fixes that. Cross-border payments that are instant, pretty much near free, and obviously there's no banks in the middle. So it's a beautiful thing what Bitcoin's doing in El Salvador.
Yeah, it's interesting when you talk about the fees. I've noticed since all the upgrades in the Bitcoin network. The fees have come right down. I know it used to be generally a $30 fee to send Bitcoin, and everyone's like, it's old, it's slow, it's not there. Transactions have got way faster now. Sure, with blockchain, there's always sometimes where it can slow down a little bit, but I've noticed the upgrades with that. And so with what El Salvador have brought in, it's been really, really powerful. And one thing that can you explain to like the newbies or the people caught in the, but Bitcoin price is down, El Salvador's been buying the price high. Can you just explain a bit of why that's probably not even a relevant conversation right now? I know from my understanding, but can you talk to that a little bit?
Yeah, so essentially Bitcoin's very volatile. Bitcoin is the best performing asset over the past 12 years, but it's also seen something like 80% corrections or crashes in its history. So Bitcoin's a young technology. It's only adopted by somewhere between 1% to 5% of the world. So nobody understands what Bitcoin is. So essentially what you've got is when people see the price go down a little bit, they sell it. They're known as the weak hands or the retail money. So the retail money was buying Bitcoin last year when it was 40, 50, 60, $70,000 a pop. And when they saw China ban Bitcoin or when they saw the equity market sell off, they all raced to sell their Bitcoin because they're scared of a global recession that's coming down the line. So Bitcoin's very volatile. Bitcoin will continue to be very volatile for the next 5 or 10 years. I don't actually think Bitcoin's going to not be volatile until it's worth 10, 20 or $50 million a coin.
I always like it when you put a prediction in there. It gets the energy going. One thing I love, and it's still to the point of well, I feel El Salvador's move, it doesn't matter where they've bought in and their buy-in prices and stuff like that is, it's a long-term play for them. We're talking about a country, a third world country that you said is poor, and you gave some great facts at the start there of one of the reasons why they're poor. And Bitcoin really takes a lot of the power away from the banking cartel's control on how a country, this is the thing, it's like they can control a whole country through their monetary system. And the other thing is too, is the US dollar as a measurement tool for something like Bitcoin. I always say to people, I'm like, well, yeah, Bitcoin's all-time high was like 69,000 US or whatever. It's at 20,000 US today or 19 and a half. Yeah, but in that time, that printing machine for the money from all the banking cartel has been running off it's been like drawing all the power from all our solar panels across the planet because we really need them apparently going forward. There's another tangent. Draining batteries everywhere and nuclear plants are shutting down because of it. No. But as a measurement tool, the US dollar is just a fucking joke, really, to even compare the price of when Bitcoin was all-time high to now. Like, I tell people that, well, Bitcoin's actually been really fucking stable. Like I say, it's the best performing asset. If you take away the US dollar in its current form as a measuring tool, and you go, well, back then, if the same amount of US dollars was here now, there's 80% more or probably more. If that was the same, the price of Bitcoin would probably be pretty similar. If not, probably it gone up. So the $19,500 is the value of how many Bitcoin or how many Satoshis or whatever you've got. So El Salvador have been accumulating from what I see.
And they've been buying the dip as well, Steve.
100%. Dollar cost averaging. I like, not financial advice on any of this here, but I show people the dollar cost average. Countries are fucking doing it because it works. So you got any more to add into that?
Oh, yeah. I completely forgot to mention the El Salvador thing. So obviously, I think Nayib Bukele first started buying Bitcoin at around 45,000 US dollars. So for the Australian listeners, that's about 60,000 Australian dollars, maybe 65,000. And obviously the price of Bitcoin's, it crashed all the way down to, it's pretty much at 20,000 US dollars now. So a lot of people are saying, oh, Bukele's destroyed the treasury reserves of El Salvador. Well, there's a couple of things to kind of add in there. Like Bukele didn't actually buy that much Bitcoin based on the amount of treasury reserves the country has. I think he only put something like 1% of the treasury reserves into Bitcoin. I don't know the exact figures off the top of my head, but it's very small. And Bukele's been buying all the way down. So I saw when Bitcoin was at $19,500, Bukele bought another 10 or $20 million of Bitcoin. So he understands the long-term potential of Bitcoin and he's buying up as much as he can. And then on the other really good point you raised about, yes, Bitcoin's down 80%, but you also need to track what these other currencies are losing in a year. So the US dollar has lost 15% of its purchasing power against goods and services over the past year. And then a lot of these other smaller currencies, they're lost even more than that. So for example, Argentina, I think yearly inflation in Argentina is something like 90% right now. So the Argentinian peso has just lost 90% of its value in the past 12 months. They don't really care so much that Bitcoin's down 70% because it's actually more stable than their local currency. Same thing in Sri Lanka. Like, obviously, they're not a small country, Sri Lanka. They have a population of 25 or so million people, but they're living for inflation of 100%. And the government has enforced massive capital controls on all the bank accounts in Sri Lanka. So you've got the option: hold a Sri Lankan rupee that's down 100% in a year and you're subject to capital controls, or you can hold Bitcoin. Yes, Bitcoin's down 70%, but Bitcoin also doesn't have any capital controls and there's no banks or governments that can tell you what to do with your Bitcoin. So that's a great point you raised. People need to kind of look at the recent Bitcoin correction in the perspective of what these other currencies around the world are doing, because we're seeing the highest inflation levels that we've seen in 50 years, all across not just emerging markets like Argentina and Sri Lanka, but also in Australia, the US, and the UK. I'm sure we're going to get into the UK shortly, but the central bank in England, the Bank of England, is resorting back to quantitative easing, which means they're just simply printing money while inflation is above 10%. That's right. We should get the money printer meme up. But I think that's a great kind of point you raise about Bitcoin, and you do need to look at it in the broader picture of what's the other currencies doing.
It's so funny. Like, I have conversations with people, they like, crypto's gone, blah, 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 but they've got other assets. Like, I have people reach out to me that have been buying cars over the last 10 years, and price of cars, which still a lot are a very fast, rapidly depreciating asset. But right now, like, you can't buy a secondhand Land Cruiser in Australia. It goes up in price secondhand Land Cruiser, because now there's this shortage of Land Cruisers. And I've got a mate who keeps, well, he's sort of a mate. If he keeps bagging me about crypto, he won't be for long. But he's got some older cars like Holden HQs and these, but done up. He's like getting offers now that are 100% appreciated on value in the last 12 months. So it's fascinating what's playing out now with different assets. Like, a lot of people don't see cars as assets. I actually do. I'm not a car person, but I can see what's going on with that sort of stuff. Just like there's a lot of conversation around gold and silver and these sorts of things. I think we're going to see, like you say, that the volatility is going to come into all of these actual assets versus the fake, invisible bullshit monetary system, fiat stuff and all that. As that implodes, inflation and all the other things, and all the agendas are pushed, of course, it's all part of the agendas. You're going to see these other assets that people have, aside from property, I think, depends where you live. You're going to see them start to be truly valued for what they're probably worth, not measured against the US dollar, but as an asset. It's a fascinating time, man. It's going back to the currencies. You brought up a chart before we jumped on the call there of all the currencies going down. Again, you were right at the start. People love a visual. So if you're listening to this podcast, it's a good prompt. Any of the podcasts I do with Luke, he's always got some epic visuals. Jump over to the YouTube channel. The WILDMAN.
Always got a chart for you, Steve. Always got a chart for you. Can you see the chart that I've brought up there at the moment?
Got it, mate. Got it. That's a fascinating one.
It's beautiful. I really love it. So for anyone who is listening in on the podcast platforms like Apple Podcasts or Spotify, this is the time of the episode where we say head on over to YouTube. Definitely subscribe to Steve's channel as well. There's some great interviews on there on YouTube. But we're looking at a chart that's measuring the US dollar against a lot of its other large global competitors around the world. So we're not looking at small currencies like the Sri Lankan rupee or the Zimbabwe dollar. We're looking at big currencies. So we're looking at the euro, the British pound, the Japanese yen, the Canadian dollar, and the Australian dollar. And we can see every single currency all around the world is being absolutely decimated by the US dollar. So we know that the US dollar is losing somewhere around 15% of its value every single year against goods and services. Okay, the government admits that the official CPI inflation is 8%. We all know the government's lying. Head on over to shadowstats.com and it shows you the actual depreciation of the dollar. And it's around 15% a year. So the US dollar is losing 15% a year. And then have a look at all of these other currencies. I know there's lots of Australians probably watching this podcast, and you can see the Australian dollar has lost 12% of its value against the US dollar in the past 12 months. So you have to remember, the US dollar is losing 15% of its value against stuff, the stuff you want to buy. The Australian dollars lost 11% against that. So it's just kind of measuring what's happening all around the world. And the Japanese yen down 23% against the dollar in the past 12 months. The British pound down 22% against the dollar in the past 12 months. What you're watching it's carnage. That's what you're watching. I'm actually calling it a currency war. I think we're at the very conclusion of this 80-year long-term debt cycle. And I personally think the United States is actually trying to retain its hegemony as the global reserve currency holder. So the US dollar, for anyone who doesn't know, the US dollar is the global reserve currency at the moment. So around 70% of international trade is done in US dollars. And when there's fears of a global depression or a global recession, people are scared and they sell everything. So they sell their tech stocks, they sell their bonds, they sell their Bitcoin, they sell their shit coins. They sell everything and they run to the US dollar. And I think it's really fascinating that we're watching people flee their local currencies. So they're trying to sell their euros, sell their British pounds and their Australian dollars and flee to the US dollar. So that's kind of what this chart here is visualizing. I think it's one of the more interesting charts of the past 2 years.
It's interesting too. And again, people to wrap their head around it, that chart might show you, well, the US dollar is going up versus these other things. That's the simple thing. But what you've explained there, actually, if it's depreciating by 15% a year, true numbers, versus these other currencies, like versus goods and services. Again, you go to the purchasing power. The great example for people out there is go to the supermarket. Actually take note of what a bag of shopping costs you now and watch that go up and up and up. That's the purchasing power of your dollar. In Australia, you mentioned it before we jumped on, and I'm 100% with this. Who would want to trade out any of their other things for the Australian dollar right now? Like, I'm like, I can't say on the podcast, but anyway, I have a strategy. Very, very mindful what I share on here.
Yeah, all legit, you and me both, all brother.
Good, but any currencies, any fiat right now. And it's an interesting thing. A lot of people ask me, it's like, well, what do we do when we want to like hold our money, or we want to come out of the banks? What do we do? I keep saying to them, like, there's a lot of risk everywhere right now. A lot of people a couple of years ago would say, well, I don't want to put it into digital currencies like Bitcoin or crypto, and there's too much risk. Like, I'd rather keep it in the bank. But I think it's become evident in the last couple of years that the banks have become probably more risky than ever before. Mm-hmm. Like, you and I would have known for long before the last couple of years that banks are like, get the fuck out. But it's become more evident as we go on that they're probably riskier than going digital or going into some other asset class, and even keeping cash. Like, you keep Australian dollars, but the purchasing power is going down. What's your take on like going forward, maybe with where we are? I know you're probably going to say stack Bitcoin, but with that too, give your reasoning. Like, people have got a heap of money in the bank. Well, without it being financial advice, who cares? You're in El Salvador anyway. You're giving El Salvador financial advice. Yeah. What would you suggest to people to maybe look at or look into or even research?
Yeah, so for me personally, the reason I'm so heavily into Bitcoin is because I believe it's the only asset in the world that's actually undervalued. So since we left the gold standard in 1971, our central banks have essentially inflated a bunch of asset bubbles through creating lots of very cheap debt. So we're living in a debt bubble, and I believe real estate is very overvalued. I believe stocks are very overvalued. I believe bonds are very overvalued. For example, stocks and bonds have just had their worst year in centuries. Okay, so people are running out of these assets because they're beginning to understand that they're very overvalued. So I personally do think that Bitcoin is the most undervalued asset all around the world. I could make an argument that maybe gold is undervalued, and maybe there's a short-term case where maybe someone like Russia and the Saudis and China get together and they start selling oil and gold for the next year or two, look, that's a possibility. I'm not going to rule it out. I'm not going to rule out the fact that, maybe gold could do well over the next couple of years. But I really do think that now is the time to at least be diversified. I think if you have zero Bitcoin, I think that's the wrong decision. I think everybody needs a little bit of Bitcoin, even if you don't believe in it that much. I think having money outside the system that can't be controlled, censored, taxed, or debased is a very beautiful thing. And Bitcoin's the only asset in the world that can't be taxed, controlled, censored, or debased. So that's personally why I really do. Well, I'm 100% Bitcoin. I'm all in. I'm taking like a kind of a 3 to 5 year look at the world, and I'm saying to myself, look, we're at the conclusion of an 80-year long-term debt cycle. Every asset around the world is overinflated. When governments have enormous amounts of debt like they do today, at the end of these 80-year long-term debt cycles, they need to go through a form of deleveraging. Okay, there's too much debt. There's too much leverage. The system needs to deleverage itself. Typically, through these deleveraging phases, the currency gets debased. So that means your cash is going to lose value and the asset bubbles are going to burst. So your stocks, your bonds, your real estate, all those asset bubbles that have been inflated through the leveraging phase, they will be subsequently devalued through the deleveraging phase. So I personally think Bitcoin is going to be the only asset that's going to hold up well on the other end of this long-term debt cycle. So I'm kind of zooming out a little bit. I'm not getting caught up in the crazy swings of the Bitcoin price. Like Bitcoin was only 2 years ago, Bitcoin was $4,000. It ran all the way up to $70,000. It's ran all the way back down to $20,000. And people only look at the past 12 months. They say, oh, Bitcoin's down from 70,000 to 20,000. You just lost 80% of your net worth. That's right. I did. I lost 80% of my net worth, but Bitcoin is still up 400% since early 2020. So personally, I've been all in Bitcoin for a little while now. And I just kind of zoom out. I just ride the volatility. I have a medium to long-term approach that I believe Bitcoin is going to be the next global reserve currency. I've done the maths on what value Bitcoin will be if hypothetically it is the next global reserve currency, and it's going to be worth 20, 30, 40, $50 million a coin.
There he goes again, predictions again.
yeah, just math, just simple grade 11 maths, as my good friend Greg Foss calls it. So me personally, it doesn't matter if you buy Bitcoin at 20,000 or 16,000, or if you get really cute and you buy Bitcoin at 12,000 because you think it's going to go there. If Bitcoin does become the next currency of the world and it's 10 or 20 or $50 million, doesn't matter whether you buy it 15 or 20K. Nobody can pick the exact bottom of a market, but you can get pretty close, and you can start to understand when a market is cheap. And historically, and when Bitcoin's down 75% in value, it's been a great time to buy.
Yeah, 100%. And again, like I mentioned earlier in the podcast, you ground into charts, and the term zoom out always helps. Even with mine, it's a long-term game. As soon as you zoom out on he brings up the Bitcoin chart right on cue. It's a fascinating pattern that's playing out, and it's fascinating right where we are today in this chart. But I love charts for this reason. Like, a lot of people enter the market, like you mentioned too, the retail money coming into the market. They generally come in when it's booming and on the way up. They FOMO in and FOMO in, and yes, long term, yes, but they always sell on the way down. It's such an easy, because they choose not to, or they just let emotions dictate their decisions. They don't zoom out. Zooming out on the Bitcoin chart right now is fascinating. If again we have a cycle playing out that history never repeats, but if it sort of rhymes since its inception, we could be in for some like fireworks in the next few years. And then your predictions, which is just mass of the million, the 10 million or beyond, it actually seems really, really doable and easy from a chart perspective.
Yeah, exactly. So if anyone who is still listening in on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, I'll once again encourage you to get on over to YouTube, because we're looking at a chart that's looking at the past 13 years of Bitcoin's life. And we can see that on like 7 or 8 occasions, Bitcoin has had a correction larger than 60%. Typically, those corrections are somewhere between 60 and 85%. And, this is very normal for Bitcoin. Again, it's a young asset. It's only adopted by somewhere around 1 to 5% of the world. So it's very volatile. Amazon, the largest company in the world today, it's worth trillions of dollars, literally trillions of dollars. That was also very volatile when it was being adopted by the world. Okay, these technologies that go from 0% to 50, 70, 80, 90% adoption, they're very volatile in their adoption phase. And not many people can actually understand what they're going through when it's happening. So not many people understand, okay, I'm buying Amazon at $5 a share when 1% of the world understands it. I'm going to sell it when it's worth thousands of dollars a share. They can't ride the volatility out in the meantime. So I think Amazon had like 3 90% corrections and 5 corrections bigger than 60%, something like that. Again, it's off the top of my head, so they may not be exact figures, but Amazon was very volatile. Apple was very volatile. The internet stocks were very volatile, and so is Bitcoin. So typically you guys can see that typically buying Bitcoin when it's down 75 or 80%, it's been a great time to buy some Bitcoin. That's typically when Bitcoin's very cheap, and that's when you want to buy it. Nobody knows when the exact bottom is going to be of any market. So I average in when she's cheap, and I think it's pretty cheap today.
Yeah, a lot of people rely on like who can predict the bottom and all that sort of thing. I have a bottom number. Do you have a bottom number, what you think it's going to be? And this is from a charting perspective, from a pattern. I'm happy to share mine if you'll share yours.
Ooh, I got a couple levels. I do like to engage in a little bit of short-term speculation from time to time.
Yeah.
I think 20K is such a significant number. If you look at Bitcoin on a monthly chart, we only really wick down to 17K for a couple of weeks. We have spent a couple of weeks under 20K, but I think if you look at it on a monthly, maybe in 6 months' time, this could be the bottom. I think if it goes any lower, I think a lot of people are talking about $12,000. That looks like a pretty significant. Oh, there we go.
It's going to be for it won't even stay there for a minute. I think it's just going to be a really short, sharp black swan event. It's just going to wick it down. It might even wick below that, but I mean, whoever's going to catch it, because I know a bunch of people are loaded up with their with their buy orders for them, but I think it's going to take a black swan event. I think we've got one more at least coming in the next 6 months. But from there, I think the true bottom is where we're at now. Do you look at the accumulation that's happening over the last few months? And again, if you're going to go back to the chart from, I see you had that downtrend, that year 12-month downtrend. Where we're at now is a really interesting time too on the chart where we here we go.
Might bring it up on like a daily chart.
Yeah,
you can kind of see Bitcoin's kind of flirting with this. So it's been in a downtrend for a year, and it's just kind of flirting with this trend line. Very interesting. It's very interesting. I used to do a lot of trading when I was a lot younger. I don't do so much anymore. Just because Bitcoin for me is just savings, not really a trading vehicle. But you can kind of see, I think that's interesting. Bitcoin's been in a downtrend for the past 12 months, and you can kind of see, maybe it's getting close to testing a downtrend. I'm not going to call a change of trend too early, but I do when we are historically very cheap, like I believe we are right now. I certainly start paying attention to things like this, potential changes in trend. Bitcoin is just kind of hovering around 20,000 every single time it goes underneath 18,000. It's bought up very quickly. You raise a good point, Steve. Lots of people have bids stacked at $12,000. Typically, when you have a very key level of significance like that, and if everybody thinks it's going to go to 12,000, you actually get the big money. They will actually set massive bids at, say, $12,500 or $13,000 just before all of the bids get filled. So that's maybe something to keep in mind as well, and something I used to look at in my trading days. But if somebody was trying to buy 12K, I'd have bids at like 14K, 13.5, 13K, 12.5. I wouldn't be trying to pick exact bottoms. That is very risky business.
I'm happy at the price it's at now, man. Seriously, to accumulate, I think it's fantastic. You even see, even with the green box there for people seeing the visual, that's gone down to basically the all-time high of 2017,
Mm.
thereabouts. That's why I think right now we're at such a key significant level. Again, we've only wicked down below that a couple of times very briefly. And in the history of Bitcoin, that tends to be the bottom of the market. It tends to be before the next bull run.
Exactly right. So typically, typically when we get these pullbacks, they kind of these 85% corrections. Typically, they don't go lower than the previous all-time high. So the all-time high in 2017 was about $19,500, I think, from memory. So again, Bitcoin did go down to 17,000 on the small time frames, but I think if you zoom out and look at it on a monthly, it would look very similar to previous cycles, because in previous cycles, that's kind of what we've seen. I'll have a quick look here at the 2013 bull market. We can kind of see the peak for the 2011 bull market was $33. And you can see when we had this correction in 2013, we didn't actually go under that $33. And then I suppose you can kind of see a similar thing here in 2013. The 2013 bull market peak was, what's that, around $220. And you can see that next bull run, you have the 85% correction, and it pretty much pulls back to the previous all-time high. Got all sorts of lines going on the chart here. I hope I'm making sense to the listeners, but essentially, this is a great time to be buying.
Yeah, definitely. Again, and I love the chart, and I love looking at the long-term chart, and it just helps, again, for listeners out there that may have come in, especially last year, to the crypto market. Just like in 2017, a lot of people entered the market then and they bought in like in December. And by February next year, they're all selling off going, oh, what was I doing? Made a mistake and blah, blah, blah. But same happened last year. But if you FOMO'd in last year, there's actually nothing to fret. If you're still holding, especially, you've done really, really well. And holding on, if, like I say, even if we have some sort of sideways movement while the world does what it does and the currency wars, as you describe it, play out, and you're just holding on to an asset like this Bitcoin, I think you're going to come out well on top. I really do.
Yeah.
As simple as that. Quick one. I was going to ask this before we go. This is a funny looking chart. This is what I look like. My 4-year-old drew this one. This is cool. What about this asset? What do you think of that one?
What, you got silver?
I got silver. What do you think?
Okay.
I've got a couple of silver maxis. Colin L,
Yeah.
you listeners out there, Colin L, check out the episodes I've done with him recently. Silver maxi. What do you think?
So I think I do think commodities overall are structurally undervalued when you look at like historical averages. So I look at a lot of these charts that kind of measure how commodities were valued against stocks in like the 1970s and the 1980s, and like commodities are historically very, very underpriced. I think we're in like a 10-year commodity super cycle. Typically, these commodities go through these 10-year super cycles every 15 or 20 years. I think everything like oil, gas, and then obviously all your metals like gold, silver, nickel, palladium, they are all undervalued. If you're looking at monetary metals, personally, I think gold's more attractive than silver. A lot of people say, oh, but you look at the gold and silver ratio, and silver's very, very undervalued compared to gold when you look at it historically. And that is true, but something to keep in mind there is, why was silver more valuable in the past, in the 15, 16, 17, 1800s? That's because silver was kind of being used as a medium of exchange, while gold was being used as the store of value. So essentially, as we transition to paper money in the 20th century, gold kind of stayed as the store of value that kind of backed that currency. But all of a sudden, silver's use case got taken away from it in terms of a monetary use case, because the paper receipts that were supposed to back the gold, they became the medium of exchange that facilitated trade and kind of did what silver used to do for hundreds and hundreds of years previous to then. So that's kind of why I'm not as bullish on silver as I am gold. I think both are undervalued. I wouldn't be surprised to see the paper markets break. I was actually talking to, I think it's Andy Hoffman. He actually worked with GATA. So that's the Gold Action, what is it called? Gold Action Task Force or something like that. And he's been investigating the manipulation in the metals markets for the past 40 years. So I met him at a conference we were both speaking at recently, a Bitcoin conference. And he kind of told me that he thought the leverage on the gold market was something like 600 to 1. So he was saying there's 600 paper receipts, gold paper receipts, for every 1 ounce of gold that's actually in the bullion banks. And he said silver, he thinks it's somewhere around 300 to 1. So there's about 300 silver ounce receipts for every 1 ounce of physical silver that's sitting in the metals banks. So that's why gold and silver are so undervalued, just because the central banks and the banks kind of control the price of them through just creating these paper contracts. So I think that's another reason why I'm a Bitcoiner more than I am a gold bug. So I was actually buying gold and silver before I was buying Bitcoin. I was buying gold and silver in 2017, 2018, because I saw the financial system was broken and it was breaking down. And I felt a little bit weird. I was being made fun of by all my 17 and 18-year-old friends because there's not many 18-year-old kids who have gold and silver, but I did. I was that weirdo. So obviously I have a soft spot for gold and silver. I don't want to just trash it. But I think like a reason that gold and silver's price has been manipulated so heavily is because it's nearly impossible to take physical delivery of your gold and silver. So it's very hard to take delivery of 100 ounces of gold or something ridiculous like that. So that's how these bullion banks are able to manipulate the price and suppress it with the creation of all these paper contracts. Now, this is where Bitcoin's very different, because Bitcoin is very, very, very easy to custody. Anyone who has a Ledger or a Trezor or a Bitbox hardware wallet, they would understand how easy it is to actually take your Bitcoin off the exchange and put it into your own wallet. So I actually think there's going to be a situation in the next 5 years where all of these exchanges like Coinbase and CoinSpot, I think they're going to maybe even run out of Bitcoin, and you're going to actually see a Bitcoin short squeeze, because I personally do think these exchanges are creating paper Bitcoin, just like the banks are creating paper gold and silver receipts. But Bitcoin's so much easier to self-custody it. So that's kind of why I'm a lot more bullish on Bitcoin than gold and silver.
Man, there's a prime reason why I have you on as a guest, mate. You always drop something new in there. I love that breakdown of the silver versus gold. And of course, I'm not going to flash my gold bullion on a podcast. Silver's all right.
It's wise.
Yeah. That's awesome. I'm going to get my mate Cole to look at that. And if my team are editing this, please do this as a clip so I can share this everywhere, because that was really, really important what you shared there. And again, I'm glad I asked. And was there a little plug there about a crypto custody wallet there too? I heard him there. I have to chat to you about that off the show too.
Please do.
Yeah, I have a Trezor at the moment, but of course I'm not one for putting everything in the one place.
Well, I can hook you up with a discount with a Bitbox O2 hardware wallet. They're a great little
Plug away,
Bitcoin-only hardware wallet.
Away.
Yep. Plug away. They sponsor my YouTube channel, and if you're looking for somewhere to buy Bitcoin in Australia, head on over to Amber. Amber's got you covered.
I'll have to talk to you about that too. Plug away. Yeah, your YouTube channel. Tell us a little, well, perfect little segue. Tell us a little bit more about it now instead of saving it to the end.
Yeah, so I'm still obviously making educational videos on Bitcoin, but not only Bitcoin, all sorts of other things. So today I was filming a video on the currency wars. Tomorrow I'll be filming a video on Credit Suisse and why the Bank of England is about to go bankrupt and Europe's about to blow up. Talk about all sorts of things like the energy crisis that's manifesting itself all around the world. A lot of people think energy prices are going up because of Putin's price hike, and that's just not true. It's all because the governments are trying to push us into using unreliable forms of energy like solar and wind. So that's obviously a rabbit hole. I'm interested in all sorts of things, technology, Bitcoin, the great narrative. Oh yes, don't you worry. I go down all sorts of rabbit holes on there, talking about Klaus Schwab.
It's a script.
Yeah. Yes. I haven't read that one yet, but yeah, I talk about all things on YouTube. I like to expose the truth and try to teach people what they haven't been taught about in school, because that really kind of annoys me, I suppose, or it's one thing I'm mildly angry about, the fact that governments just lie to the people. And they don't just lie to you about the money, they lie to you about the energy, they lie to you about the food, and they lie to you about the educational system. So I like to kind of talk about all of those things on my YouTube channel. And obviously, I get the pleasure of talking to some brilliant people like you, Steve. I also have a podcast. So I post some interviews and podcasts on the YouTube channel as well, where I just try to learn from some of the smarter and greatest minds around the world. So
what's the name of your YouTube channel? I'll put it in the links below, just for everyone listening.
So got a couple of channels. If you type in Bitcoin Made Simple podcast into YouTube, you should be able to find it. It's also on Spotify, Apple Podcasts. And then obviously I've got another channel as well. It's called Fix the Money, Fix the World. So it's a little bit easier to spell than my last name. My last name's it's Croatian/Serbian. It's from the old Yugoslavian days, Mikic. So that's impossible to spell for people. So I went for something a little bit easier.
I've got it now. I know how to spell it now. It took me a bit.
Yeah.
Awesome. Let's get back to what you've got in the share screen there. That was a perfect tangent, by the way, too. Epic.
I love a good tangent.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, so the chart we got at the moment, this is just kind of tracking how technologies get adopted. So essentially, all technologies, whether it's the internet or the smartphone or obviously the personal computer, they all get adopted very slowly to begin with. So typically it takes a technology 10 years to go from 0 to 10% adoption. But then typically it takes the same amount of time, so 10 years, to go from 10% adoption to 90% adoption. So that's pretty much mainstream. And that's because technologies for the first 10 years, they're new, they're weird, they're not quite ready to go mainstream. Everybody thinks they're weird. But then kind of as the network effects grow and the technology kind of builds its roots in society and you get to around 5 to 10% adoption, all of a sudden network effects kick in. And the technology goes mainstream because everybody wants to race to use this new technology that's revolutionary. It's making things more efficient. It's making businesses more efficient. And everybody races for the exit and they try to adopt the technology as quickly as they can. So that's why it takes about 10 years to go from that 10% to 90% adoption. So I think it's very interesting that Bitcoin today is 13 years old. And I personally think that, adoption somewhere around 5%. And I really do think we're kind of hitting a tipping point in terms of Bitcoin adoption. So I personally, that's why I think Bitcoin's going to hit tens of millions of dollars before 2030, because I'm just looking at the average time it takes a technology to go through its kind of adoption cycle from 0% to 90%. So that's what a lot of these charts are kind of looking at. Just kind of showing you how these technologies do get adopted in these S waves. So it's like an S curve. So obviously the bottom of the S is very flat and then it gets very steep as you go through 10 to 90% adoption.
Yeah, and you mentioned a good point in there about like as the technologies, they've got more usability in the world and they're adopted because of that. And I've just got a little, you would have seen this with building things on the Bitcoin network. It's not a term or phrase you would have heard like 4 or 5 years ago. People were talking about building on Ethereum and then it became building on a Solana and these, but Bitcoin has layers that as it develops and as it's taken on, the latest one, which I love, they're talking about building good old Mr. Trump's True Social, Parler, Kanye, looks like he's purchasing Parler, and Elon with Twitter, and they're all, well, I know Kanye and Elon have always been in the crypto game, and Trump's always like, nah, Bitcoin's not real money, the US dollar's king, but we know that he talks in code. But this is something like social media networks where we're all connected in that. Everyone's like, the last 2 years realized that they don't have our best interests at heart, but stuff like that, technologies that can be built on other like Bitcoin, now people didn't think that. And yeah, I read that the other day. I'm like, oh, that's a fascinating step for it. And I know there's other ones out there. I know, what's the one that I've got? I know Mark Moss talks about it a little bit and he does some presentation. What's that one?
Maybe Tarot.
No,
maybe
JP
something.
Spears mentioned
Zion, the social media
strangest name
messaging
for
app.
But yeah, it's like for the people involved, like Zion, come on.
Yeah.
Things like that people aren't aware of. That's as the technology develops, that's the sort of stuff that can be brought onto it. So I just wanted to drop that in here because I was actually reading it yesterday, I think, on I don't know if you follow Jordan Sather. That'll probably trigger some people out there. I really, really like his work. But yeah, when he shared that, I'm like, that's so cool. But anyway.
Yeah. No, it's a great point. I think a lot of these technologies are being built out on top of Bitcoin. So for the first kind of 10 years of Bitcoin's life, Everybody was saying, oh, Bitcoin's slow, Bitcoin doesn't have smart contracts, Bitcoin has slow payments. And now all of a sudden, I think all those solutions are getting solved. So the Lightning Network gives Bitcoin instant settlement. Like we have nation states, we have countries using the Bitcoin Lightning Network to facilitate something that can handle something like 40 million transactions a second is the theoretical throughput of the Lightning Network. Instant, cheap, essentially no fees. So Bitcoin's all of a sudden no longer slow. You can buy a coffee with Bitcoin. And then obviously smart contracts are being built out on top of layers as well in Bitcoin. So you have these other layers like the Liquid Network or Rootstock, RSK. You have all of these layers that are built on top of Bitcoin. And yes, they're more centralized than the Bitcoin base chain, but they have the same smart contract capability as something like Ethereum or something like Solana. And obviously, it's built on a more secure base layer. And most importantly, it doesn't have a coin attached to it. So you don't actually need the token, the Solana token, the AVAX token, the Ethereum token that goes up and down in price to do smart contracts. You can do this in the Liquid network. Liquid doesn't have a monetary token attached to it. Just kind of shows why a lot of these Ethereum, Solana, AVAX guys, they just create the token to enrich themselves. So I think Bitcoin has smart contracts come in. You mentioned Zion. That's a great example of a social media messaging company that's been built on top of the Bitcoin Lightning Network. And that's where you're watching all sorts of things be built on top of the Bitcoin Lightning Network. So I think we're watching, I can't remember the exact name of it, Infurious or Impervious. I would encourage everyone to Google what Impervious is, but that's essentially just bringing like a stack of applications and building them on top of the Bitcoin Lightning Network. So that's things like video calls, like what Steve and I are on at the moment, like a Zoom equivalent. Obviously, servers where you can host your own information. You can have all of these things built out, incorporating the Bitcoin Lightning Network. So it's very interesting days in terms of Bitcoin development.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah, that's quality information. And I think you're going to see how rapidly it's happened in the next 2 years. When we're having a conversation, we're going to be talking about like how good have these things been to use compared to good old Facebook or whatever we used to use. Or yeah, cool. Oh, well, he's bringing up something here.
Yeah, I'm trying to see Impervious browser. I can't remember the name of the Impervious AI. So this is what I encourage everybody to go and check out. It's a Bitcoin layer 3, and it's just bringing like a stack of censorship resistant applications to be built on top of Bitcoin. So I haven't had the chance to dig into this as deeply as I could, but from memory, it's things like video calling apps and messaging apps and ways for you to host your own data so you don't get kicked off YouTube. All sorts of very cool things are being built on top of the Bitcoin Lightning Network. So looks very, very interesting days in terms of Bitcoin development.
Yeah, it's epic. It's really good to see. And I love how, and this grounds me in too, like not only the numbers and charts and facts and figures ground me in and switching off from a lot of the emotional shit around the world. But what also grounds me is as the world gets more perceived to be more chaotic, there's always solutions that are coming to the fore, and people just need to practice a lot more patience in what they do instead of getting caught up in all the shit and distracted by it. This sort of stuff is coming out so rapidly. Again, if we're having a conversation in 2 years, we're going to be sitting here talking about how good have these been to use, like compared to what we used to use. And people just need to be really, really patient with a lot of this stuff. Like even the social media. I haven't done heaps on social media this year. I haven't needed to. My business is booming away from it. I've really, really found a niche in like networking close to my community and everything like that. But I know a lot of people have left social media or been kicked off in the last few years. There's two things happening there. You mentioned censorship. A lot of people have been kicked off due to censorship, but a lot of people are left because they are afraid of being censored. Like these sorts of things, there's solutions at hand, but a lot of these people are still caught up in the arguing with that interface, the Facebooks or whatever they've been kicked off of, instead of going, okay, how can I, maybe I should be starting to research this stuff. Maybe I should be positioning myself if I want to influence people and I want to show up on my social media and that. I've already gone, like Zion, I joined up ages ago. It's like, it wasn't even out in Australia, but I'm like, all right, cool. If I'm going to move, I might start looking at this one, researching it. Is it going to be aligned? Things like that. And the more that comes to fore, that's how I work. And it's like, then I'm not caught, oh, whoa, if I lose my Facebook channel, well, fuck, what am I going to do? I don't need that now because I've built out my business outside of it. But again, for a lot of people, it's really impacted and affected their business and their marketing and all these sorts of things.
Exactly. You raise a really good point. We can waste a lot of energy trying to fight the old system and the corrupted system and the corrupted ways. We can vote all we want, we can protest all we want, but we're never going to change that old corrupted system. What we need to do is you need to opt out of that corrupted system and just go to and build your own parallel society. So obviously that doesn't just start with the money. So I can vote all I want to try to stop the Reserve Bank of Australia from lowering interest rates and printing money and devaluing my Australian dollars. I can protest, I can vote, I can do everything. I can go to the banks every day and squeal at the tellers. They're never going to change the monetary policy. The Australian dollar will continue to be devalued and it will be inevitably hyperinflated like the other 700 fiat currencies in history. Instead of fighting that old system and that old corruption, I just simply take my money and I put it where it's treated best. I put it into Bitcoin. I don't waste any energy fighting the old system. And I think that's a very important principle that people should take in all their kind of other aspects of their life. Obviously, I can squeal all I want about the unhealthy food that we're being force fed by our governments and media and health experts. But I just simply opt out and I just eat steak 3 times a day. I refuse to eat the sludge. For example, the same thing's true in education. People say, oh, I don't like what my kids are being taught at school. I don't like all of this propaganda they're being fed about gender this and gender that. I won't even go into that rabbit hole. But just, homeschool your kids or just have more or just put a bigger kind of emphasis on educating your kids, even when they're away from the public school system, making sure that they understand that a lot of the stuff they're being taught in school is propaganda. So in whatever aspect of life, or whether it's the medical industry, you don't need to fight the old medical industry. Just ignore them and route around them and make sure you're healthy. And if you eat healthy, you'll be fine. You won't need the medical industry. I think that's a good point you raise. We can waste a lot of energy going down all of these other rabbit holes and fighting the corrupted system and the corrupted ways. But I think it can be a lot more stoic, I suppose. Just worrying about what you can control, and you can control a lot. I know it doesn't seem like that for a lot of people, but there's a lot of things you can do to, control your own life and ensure that the government and the state doesn't infringe on your rights and freedoms too much. If it means you need to escape Australia and move to El Salvador like me, you can do that too. It's not as hard as you think it is.
Powerful, man. Perfect and spot on too. I could roll off a number of things that I've implemented in my life over the last few years. Where my hand hasn't been forced, the food, like I grow all my own vegetables and these sorts of things. Got a butcher that we could, even if shit shut down, we got a deal that we can go and see him off the thing, all organic meat, all these sorts of things are, and people can be more proactive. Awesome, man. Awesome way to segue to, you talk about running away to El Salvador. You didn't run away, man. You've been living the fucking dream. We were chatting a bit about this the other week about, I know when I started my entrepreneurial journey about 8 or so years ago, was all about location free, getting to Bali, going to all these amazing countries like South America, whatever, and sitting by the pool with the laptop and doing work. And you were sharing how you've been in and out of airports. It's one of the reasons it's been hard for us to align our schedule, because you've been here, there, and everywhere. We were going to chat when you're in Hawaii, and you've been every. I was sharing a little bit about mine, where in hindsight, going back to them times, for me, there was a lot of fun aspects to it, but I was always fucking tired and drained. Internet wasn't working and shit like this, trying to find, some of it was good, having stuff and that in Bali and these magic, but I look in hindsight, I'd rather be doing what I'm doing now for my work. But you're in the travel game right now, and you're finding some of these things are like, oh, this might be a bit frustrating. But on the other hand, you are sort of living the dream. Yeah. You want to speak a little bit more to that, man?
Yeah, I think traveling can certainly be a double-edged sword. I think the past, so before 2022, I'd never left Australia. I was 25, never left Australia. I think now I've seen something like 7 or 8 countries and 12 different states in the US in the span of 10 months. So I've been traveling a bit over the past 10 months. And like you say, there's lots of frustrations along the way, especially in Latin America. Sometimes you have an apartment or an Airbnb that doesn't have the basic necessities. It's got poor Wi-Fi or cold water, and just traveling. For example, I got kicked off a flight the other day, traveling Aero Mexico. I'm going to call them out on live. I'm going to call them out on YouTube. They booted me off the plane for not wearing a mask properly. Apparently, I had it over my. I refused to put it over my nose. It's tyranny. I refuse to comply with any sorts of tyrannical measures. But anyway, yeah, I got booted off a plane for that, for not wearing a mask. So yes, there's lots of downsides to traveling, but I think there's also lots of positives as well. So I think moving into the digital age, as I do think we're at the end of this 80-year long-term debt cycle, governments have more debt today than they did in the 1940s during World War II. Typically, when governments go through this period of bankruptcy, they get very, very tyrannical. So I think just having your options open, or at least your mind's open to the possibility of moving anywhere around the world, is not the worst thing in the 2020s, because it certainly does have lots of benefits. For example, like the cost of living here in El Salvador, it's cheap as chips. And if you can somehow get yourself an online job that pays you in US dollars, and you go and live in these cheap countries in Latin America like Peru or Mexico or El Salvador, or even in Asia, in Bali. I haven't seen Asia yet, but from what I've been told, it's very cheap over there as well. So I think you get lots of optionality by being able to kind of travel around the world. Obviously, you don't need to pay taxes. Again, not financial advice, but if you don't actually have a residency in a certain country and you're just kind of being a digital nomad, you don't need to pay taxes. That's a nice little benefit, but certainly a double-edged sword, Steve. What was your highlights or your favorite times from traveling back in the day? Because I know we haven't actually talked about this off air as much as I'd like to. So what were some of your favorite countries that you went to?
Well, here's the thing. I didn't actually leave Australia till I was 35, I think it was. And that was my first time going to Bali. And it was a fascinating experience. Like, it was a big turning point in my life, because I was going to like a personal growth retreat over there. But at the same time, I was going into the Bali airport. It wasn't long after the Bali bombings, maybe, whatever. So security was off its tits. I'd never been out of the country before. Back then, I was seeing flickers of the news. I wasn't watching it like I was awake, but I was not fully, like, I was still seeing what was going on in the world. And that was the medium for it then. It wasn't the YouTubes and the Facebook books and all that sort of stuff weren't as they are now. But I remember I had to take a heap of t-shirts in for the company that I was like getting coached by, and that, like, I had 45 t-shirts, and here I am looking at the tick boxes going to the airport, and you got to declare goods, and I'm like, it's got something to do with like something brought in from another country. And it was like, holy shit, that's like, I got like 45 t-shirts that are all the same in plastic. Oh, fuck. I had hardly any clothes because I had all my supplements and shit in there. I had this massive suitcase and another massive carry-on. Get in the airport, all the dudes are holding machine guns. Because it was like, I think it was something, security was off its tits. Man, I was there for like 3 hours freaking out. I had to show them my Facebook of what I was doing, what I've been talking about, the company I was going over with. They were going to hold me there. So that was my first experience going into an international airport in Bali, and where I was super pumped and excited to go there. But once I got through that, it was definitely an eye-opener. That was a highlight for me, because it did change my life really back then. And it, from there, I went back. I was going to Bali all the time. I lived in Bali for probably 12 months off and on, for a month here and a month there. That was an amazing experience too. Learning how to ride a scooter. I was scared of motorbikes growing up forever and ever. All my mates had them, but I was like this little short ass who couldn't get on their 250s and shit. So I hated motorbikes. So learning how to ride a scooter was a fun thing. And then I was like, oh, that's the best. But yeah, Bali was a really big one for me. I met a lot of people there. I'd done a lot of great work there. I ended up running retreats and events there myself. So always anything where I was giving back in the world was always exciting to travel to. The airports and everything sucked. I can't stand airports. The energy there. I think the working part, it was really, really good. My now wife, Chaitanya, we did go to Bali and that a couple of times together when we were working there. But I think the last time, like, we were going to New Zealand. I was going to Peru. I've been to Peru a couple of times, Costa Rica. But I think the last time I was in Bali, when my wife, she was pregnant with River, we decided then, like, that was the worst experience ever. We went down to southern Bali, Uluwatu. Everyone's like, it's amazing. I said the energy was fucked. We had so much emotion and stuff coming up because we were about to be new parents, and I was just like, that was the end of my location-free working part because of that experience. But to travel and stuff like that, again, Peru is fascinating. I love Peru. I will go back to Peru. We've touched on this a little bit, but my time over there working with plant medicines and the shamans and the people, like even just the marketplaces and stuff over there. I used to just hang out in the marketplace and not buy shit and just talk to like the locals. It was like so different and so awesome. And again, and it did with my work too. It did help my coaching business and all that. It was like great social proof. Here I am traveling the world, like working on myself, growing myself. And at the same time, here I am helping and coaching people. It was really good for business too. But again, the frustrations in the end, they still, in hindsight, I look at them like, holy shit, that a lot of that was so hard. Yeah, I might have like been doing the selfies, sitting in amazing places, like having fun, but the in-between stuff, it sucked ass. Trying to sit in one place to run a training, and then kept cutting out. And here I'm trying to like coach people through a training. It's cutting out, and I've got to make fucking excuses for the internet. And here I am trying to coach them through not making excuses. Come on. So that sort of stuff was really frustrating. But again, it's I think it's one of the things we look at when you're seeing the world now. You're getting massive benefit from the travel and all that. And the work you're doing is fantastic. You're working for some fucking exceptional people who are doing great things in the world. And part of it, you're going from place to place. I think that experience that comes with this, like, I know for me that had me grow more than so many other things. That like just meeting new people, like as jokes about, my wife always gives me crap because when I first went to Peru, I went into the airport. I think it was Tarapoto. And then from there, we're going to go out into the jungle, into the Amazon. But I was in the airport and I hadn't had a drink since I left Australia. I don't know what I was thinking. I was dehydrated as shit. And I got to the airport and I could not find one person that spoke English. I didn't know how to say water. I was pointing at a fridge and they wouldn't serve me because I couldn't talk to them. They didn't trust me. And I was like, I had to wait till one of the other clients was flying in so I could say, hey, I'm like dying here. How the fuck do I buy water? And I was like, aqua. And I was calling it aqua. And I couldn't say it properly. And like, again, it's one of the things that I have with it. The language, I'm like Aussie slang. That's my second language. So there was lots of growth in that too. But yeah, it's awesome that you're doing it, man. And I think one day again, I might hit the road a little bit, but it's probably going to be with something with wheels. And I'm probably gonna spend a lot more time like just with the fam and by myself and work little bits in the middle.
I love a bit of that as well. You told me that water story off air, and that's an absolute crack up. For anyone listening who speaks a little bit of Spanish, the word you need to know is "Yo necesito mucha agua." Yo necesito. It's so difficult being in Latin America and not being able to speak Spanish. I think I'm still terrible. I'm still trying to learn as much as I can, and it's a massive culture shock. But I think and the Australian accent as well, because it's not just the fact that Spanish people can't understand people who don't understand Spanish. It's the Australian accent. So even when I can pronounce the Spanish words, they still don't understand it because the Australian accent is so strong on top of it. So I definitely feel your struggles there on the trying to be in a foreign country and not know the language. That's certainly intimidating. But I mean, there's so many, like you said, in Peru, the people there are so lovely and they're so helpful. And like, if you've got a smile on your face, they're willing to help you no matter what, even if you can't speak a word of Spanish. So
it must have been the Aussie slang at the airport then that they wouldn't help me for, because I was like, and I was so dehydrated. I had a headache. I was like, oh, wow. But even then, I remember going the last time I went back, I think it was 3 years ago, I think, just before all the lockdowns and that, when I was in Peru again in the Sacred Valley, I had this instance where I went to the bank and I had to get a heap of money out of different accounts for people I was working for over there. And even then, that they going in to communicate with them, I didn't know what the fuck to say, like, because it stopped letting me get out money. And I had to get out a few more $1,000s, like, to pay for stuff for the events and that were running. And like, they were so patient and nice, but to communicate what I needed took like an hour. And it took one of the guests that were coming in who knew a bit of English to help. But again, there was so much growth in that. it was very
Mm.
uncomfortable, and there was lots of unknowns. And I think that's what you get, the culture, not just the language. The culture is very different, but they are as a people, like Peru, even Costa Rica. I love Costa Rica. It was like I don't know if you've been to Costa Rica yet. I think you have you? No?
I'm going next month, actually. I was going to
Bitcoin
ask you about
Beach.
Costa Rica off air.
Yeah. Yeah, cool. It's like I lived in far north Queensland for about 7 or 8 years. It's very much like that, but a lot wilder where I went in Costa Rica. Animals look a bit more crazy, which is funny coming from an Aussie who picks up like probably the most venomous, dangerous snakes on the planet. But yeah, there was lots of unknowns under there. Frogs that are this big that can kill you if you touch them and shit like that. But
Wow.
Costa Rica was amazing. It was an epic experience there. And I think the other thing with the travel with me, was it was always for something was to do with growth. It was always something to do was like bettering myself. And some of the positives I got from that was I met some amazing people. A lot of my friends now I met traveling around the world, but they're in Australia or they're in New Zealand. So that's probably been one of the biggest things I've got from it. And yeah, never take any of it back. No matter what difficulties I had or frustrations I had, I definitely wouldn't be here where I am now doing what I do now and loving life if I didn't experience the travel side of things.
I think everybody has to experience travel at one stage of their life.
Yeah.
Whether it's just a holiday, you don't need to move permanently overseas, but just go on a holiday to experience it first. It really is a beautiful thing. A lot of people think they've got a tough life, living in America or living in Australia, but I put yourself in a little bit of an uncomfortable position. It certainly makes you stronger, and it makes your everyday life home in Australia or America a lot easier once you've experienced a lot more of the difficulties that do come with traveling. But it's an amazing chance to meet new people, especially in my kind of industry in terms of Bitcoin. Everybody who's interested or involved in Bitcoin is pretty much based in America, and kind of like there's a little bit of a focus in Latin America at the moment, especially because a lot of these countries like Mexico, Paraguay, and obviously El Salvador, who's made it legal tender, they're all kind of showing interest in Bitcoin. So for me personally, it's a great chance to meet people in my own industry, and I think that can be true for anyone. So like if you're a digital nomad, and you're traveling to these other countries around the world, you can meet lots of other like-minded digital nomads, and it's a great chance to network and meet some very, very interesting people who are doing some very, very interesting things in the world. Everybody should definitely travel at some stage of their life, that's for sure.
Awesome, man. I think that's a good way to round this one out too, because I know how we roll, man. We we'll go over the hour, then we'll go over the 2 hours. But man, it's been epic having you on, brother. It's really appreciate you making the time in your schedule and sharing your wisdom around the markets, all thing markets, and everything that comes in with that too, guys. If you've just finished listening to this too, please go back and listen to it again, because he dropped a bunch of facts through this that are really, really important for how you would position yourself going forward. It's really interesting. We didn't even get to talk about your Uncle Klaus, but we may have to in the near future, and all the agendas and that playing out there. But I think, again, grounding into what's going in the marketplace and how you look after yourself, I think that's really, really important. Anything else you want to add, mate? I know we touched on where to find you guys that you're listening in, or if you've listened to this, definitely go to the YouTube version of this. Even jump over to Lukey's 2 channels he mentioned earlier, and the links will be down below. And go back to the earlier episodes we recorded also. So much information in there that is more relevant probably now that a lot of things have played out from when Luke was like literally had his crystal ball out. Again, charts and cycles. Pretty good at predicting things. Yeah, is there anything you want to close with, brother?
I probably the only thing I haven't mentioned is actually I think the past 12 months for Bitcoin has actually been the most bullish 12 months in Bitcoin's life. And people hear that and they say, "What? Bitcoin's down 70% in price. What are you talking about?" I think the past 12 months we've watched central banks all around the world blow up. So the Bank of England's printing money with inflation above 10%. The Bank of Japan's printing money with inflation going wild. You're watching the RBA prove that it can't raise interest rates. And what you're watching is financial market meltdown. The financial system is changing more rapidly than it has in the past 50 years. You're watching the biggest and safest currencies all around the world lose 20 or 30% of their value against the US dollar, which is losing 15% of its value against goods and services. Like, this is all a massive advertisement saying, hey, the financial system is broken. You need a solution to this. I personally think Bitcoin's the solution. The only reason it's down 70% in price over the past 12 months is because it's been caught in the crosshairs of what I think is probably one of the largest liquidity runs in financial markets of the past 50 years. Like stocks and bonds, typically the most safest assets in the world. They're the things that your superannuations and your 401ks invest in. They've just had their worst performance, their worst yearly performance in centuries. So I think it's everything's been sold off. Even the safest bond market that's worth hundreds of trillions of dollars, it's having its worst performance in hundreds of years. Bitcoin's a tiny $1 trillion asset that's just getting caught up in this liquidity squeeze. So I personally think everything that's happened over the past 12 months is only going to accelerate the adoption to Bitcoin. So yes, the price may be down at the moment, but I think I think it's actually a generational buying opportunity today in the 2020s. That's probably all I've got for you today, Steve. I shilled my podcast and my YouTube channel earlier. I spend all of my time on Twitter. I commonly tell people it's the only social media platform that I'll use on a semi-regular basis because it's the least censored, and there's a lot of very interesting conversations that are facilitated over there on Twitter. So I'd recommend everyone go and check that out for sure.
Awesome, brother. You're a legend. Champion. This has been another edition of the Wild Man Revolution podcast, highlighting men in their genius zone doing great things in the world. You are doing great things, Luke. Good to chat. Look forward to having you on next time, mate.
Thank you so much for having me on, brother. It was amazing.
I can hear the demons call when they do what they do, and now I feel like taking off, find a place with a view. The pain is never gonna stop if it's controlling you. I know that time can heal it all, I just gotta get through. I just gotta get through, I just gotta get through. Cause I feel like taking